I always let the song tell me what's needed, like where the spaces are cool to have, and where it'd be nice to have a little ear candy or a delay or a reverb or processing or
Mm.
another musical part, a percussion thing or a melodic line or whatever it might be, whatever the song calls for. Um, and sometimes there's different approaches where you just throw in the kitchen sink, or I'll just add a whole bunch of percussion, some keyboard lines, and some, crazy effects and guitars and pianos and vocals, and then dismantle it, take it out. We don't need that. Don't need this. Take that out. Break it down. So there's different ways to approach it.
Hello, you beautiful music creatives. My name is Mac Boris, the founder of Musician Guidance, and it is my privilege to officially welcome you all to the Musician Guidance podcast. Our guests today are Mark Goldstein and James Bonzai Caruso. Bonzai is a six-time Grammy Award winner with over 3 decades of experience in the music business, and Mark is a renowned entertainment industry consultant and business development director at MoonTown Records and Publishing. Guys, it's an honor to share the floor with you today. How is life treating you?
Hey, thanks for having me. It's nice to be here.
Thank you.
It's my pleasure. I'm excited for today's episode. We got a lot of questions around mixing, around the recording process, and kind of finding that balance between creativity and also business. Before we get into all of that, though, what do you guys say we kick off this episode with each of you just sharing a little bit about your story and how you got into the music business? Bonzai, we can start with yourself.
Yeah, sure. I've been doing this from the early 80s. Once I graduated high school in New Jersey, I went to New York City and interned at a recording studio in Manhattan in the early 1980s, where from there became a freelancer, recording and mixing different projects from hip hop, R&B, jazz, gospel, you name it. Ran the gamut at lots of different recording studios throughout Manhattan. And then from there went on to start, building studios and producing, and I moved out to the West Coast for a while. I'm currently in Las Vegas, but yeah, still every day recording and mixing different projects in various studios as well as in my own studios here in Vegas. And yeah, it's been quite a wonderful, beautiful, blessed ride.
Right on. I love to hear it. Thank you for sharing, Mark. Let's hear about yourself.
I started off as a professional musician, which I still am. I do studio work. I write. I'm a full ASCAP writer. I started a company for distribution. I was a content rep for IOTA when they were in California before Sony Orchard took them over. Orchard bought them out, and then Sony took over Orchard. So my company's grandfathered into Sony for distribution. Also, I work with other companies, as you mentioned, also Herb Middleton's label. I started off with him as a business development director, but about 3 weeks ago, he asked me to take over the company and be CEO, which is wow, what I'm doing with a staff of 6 people working with me. So that's a challenge. Very nice person, great producer, and I met a lot of nice people through him also, which enriches my, I guess, my database of collaborators. So I got into entertainment business because it was necessary for me. Every project I ever worked on, and clients, artists, everybody came to me for help. So when I was actually performing musician, I dealt with all the contracts, all the legal stuff for every project I was involved with. So I just branched out to do that more encompassing and work with people worldwide. Most of my clients are in the US, but I do have some I deal with overseas.
Right on. I appreciate you sharing that. Yeah, the business side of it is so important. I mean, I know we're all seeing artists that are just kind of neglecting that part and making a lot less money because they're not learning that. So with the backgrounds, with you guys sharing your backgrounds, I appreciate that. Bonzat, one thing I want to ask yourself, just to kind of get into the the meat of the podcast here is, you mentioned that, and I guess I mentioned in the introduction, you've been in this business for over 30 years, right? You've seen a lot of technological changes. How has technology influenced the way that you approach recording compared to when you started your career?
Oh my gosh. Oh, what a transformation it has been. Because in the early days of the 80s, we had our samplers like the emulator, and the drum machines were fairly new with that, the Lindrum and the 808. And so in those days it was about sampling with big synthesizer samplers like the emulator and things of that nature, the Akai's, the MPCs, which was wonderful to, because I was really attracted to producers like Trevor Horn, the way they were used sampling techniques with all his stuff he was doing with Frankie Goes to Hollywood, Grace Jones, the Yes records, Owner of a Lonely Heart was a big influence on me in the early 80s in terms of production and use of samplers. But then it really took a huge leap into digital audio in the mid 90s with the advent of digital audio, Digidesign, Pro Tools,
Sure.
and yeah, Digital Performer. And once digital audio came in, it just opened up the floodgate, opened up the amount of the things that you could do. Just it was like so many options in terms of manipulating audio, and not um getting rid of it, in other words, not destructively, whereas the analog world, a lot of times, when you hit record, it's gone. There's having options in the digital realm really changed everything from a production standpoint. Flipping things backwards was really easy. Flying things in, and the visual aspect of digital audio really changed the whole ball game.
I can imagine. I know there's so many like tools and plugins now that sometimes a person, for lack of a better word, will use one of those plugins or something and call themselves a producer all of a sudden because of how technology makes it easy. But that's not exactly making a producer. And I think that term is uh, too loosely thrown around, and it kind of undermines how much, work it takes. As well, though, by having all these plugins and stuff like that that you can easily add, and tools and effects and all of that, it's cool. But I know you mentioned this in kind of the last call we had, that sometimes people are doing too much. And can you talk about the importance of being a reducer as much as a producer?
Yeah, that's what I'm labeled as a lot. Yeah, because there's something, well, I mean, every project is different, every song is different. So there's nothing wrong with having a lot of chain of events happening to get end up with a particular sound. There's nothing wrong with that approach. It's just, like I said, for me, from my standpoint, it's always been about the song. It's always
Right.
been about the artist, the project, and the song. Those are the most important things. And what does that call for? Is it an organic sound? Is it richly organic with acoustic instruments, and that's the vibe? Or is it like in your face, hardcore, very processed, so much digitized and just like obnoxious and distorted. I mean, and then hybrids, elements of both, which is what I love, having both of those things. So
Sure.
no real rule or law or playbook, or if you will, for these kind of things. But I tend to try to capture sounds in the recording process, capture the sounds as true to form as possible to fit the production, the vibe of the song. It's all about the energy of the song. So I always try to start with the pure sounds, the good quality sounds to start with. So you don't want to have to try and fix it and enhance it so much later, but we have so many options to do so, right? So there's nothing wrong with that. It's just how to apply them that works for the song.
Absolutely. And let me ask you this then. How do you find that balance between making impactful creative decisions, but also knowing when to take a step back and simplify it, so to speak?
Yeah, well, that's the producer ears, my musician ears. I'm a musician first as well,
Right.
before I even started in my engineering career. And yeah, it's just wearing those ears and paying attention to. Here's one thing that I like to share, that is, I always let the song tell me what's needed, like where the spaces are cool to have, and where it'd be nice to have a little ear candy or a delay or a reverb or processing or
Mm.
another musical part, a percussion thing, or a melodic line, or whatever it might be, whatever the song calls for. Um, and sometimes there's different approaches where you just throw in the kitchen sink, or I'll just add a whole bunch of percussion, some keyboard lines, and some, crazy effects, and guitars and pianos and vocals, and then dismantle it, take it out. We don't need that. Don't need this. Take that out. Break it down. So there's different ways to approach it. And I try to go with the flow of the energy of the project, of the song.
I have a question for you, Bonzai. Noted over the years, we used to have physical effects units, reverbs, digitizers, all that, and now we're going to software based. Do you feel there's a difference in the quality and the usability of going to software as using physical units for effects?
Yeah, there are differences in both. I came from the analog world all through the 80s and 90s. So I love the analog process, the patching of the signal routing, your signal chain going through a compressor and an equalizer, sending it to, reverb units, echo chambers, real room echo, spaces. Which is wonderful, and I still use them. I use a hybrid approach where I still utilize those along with the digital processing of plugins, virtual stuff, plugins, and use them together. But the ease of use, and also passing along projects from producer to producer, engineer to engineer, studio to studio, having all those elements right there, obviously within the box in the digital realm, makes it very easy for everyone to jump on and on a collaborative scale, right?
Do you feel
So
the quality of sound is comparable?
it's getting better. It has been getting better. It wasn't, and that I wasn't very impressed in the mid '90s and late '90s when it first started. We started using all these plugins, but they have really improved the emulation software into a lot of these plugins. They really do mimic and emulate analog much better now, and it continues to do so. But yeah, there is a difference. To my ear. But it's they're still very useful.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, you talked about kind of letting the song, drive you and dictate, what creative decisions to make. And I know your mixing style has caught the attention of many prominent, artists. I could sit here for an hour and list them all. Can I get you to elaborate on your unique approach to mixing and how it has evolved over the years too, with this hybrid approach, and especially as technology has now been getting a little better?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a meme that goes around in the audio engineering world of what wave used to look like, wave files used to look like.
I got
Your
you.
dynamic range has gone from nice dynamic ranges to like box, like a brick, right? And volume. It's the volume wars, right? The loudness thing, which I'm not a big fan of, but I know it's part of the industry. It's part of what we do, and more so in some genres than others, especially electronic dance music or drum and bass, or hip hop. Certain things that are really in your face, where opposed to organic sounding acoustic instruments, acoustic driven stuff. There's a lot more dynamic range. Obviously,
Sure.
not everything's in your face. So to answer your question, yeah, the approach is really, again, it goes back to what is the product, keeping in consistent in terms of the integrity. I like to say the integrity of the song, of what it is. So that really dictates to me how much I'm pushing, how hard I'm pushing stuff, how loud I'm pushing stuff, how aggressive the mixing approach is, and production approach, and where's that balance of. And I like to have the balance, the things I really love are dynamic range. Dynamic range to me is everything. I love the quiet moments, and then the in your face loudness, and everything in between. That to me is as a listener and as a producer is something I really enjoy.
Absolutely. And I think, yeah, I think that's kind of what you touched on there, that's kind of been lost. Like I remember, and I don't remember if it was Beethoven, Mozart, or Bach, if I'm pronouncing that right, where they would end their shows with like a loud bang because like they'd start, you know, upbeat and all that. Throughout the middle, it would kind of be more subdued. People might be falling asleep to it and relaxing, and then they'd end with a bang to kind of wake everybody up, I think it was. But there was definitely more of that dynamic in songs than we're seeing. Like there still is now, but a lot of them too are just like cookie cutter mundane, like as you mentioned, just kind of, you know, a box file there. Um, One thing I also want to ask you, I know a lot of, you know, engineers and producers have a signature sound. So as much as they let the song guide them and they play into, you know, what the client would like, they do still, and it's based off knowing what works too, knowing what sells, knowing what sounds good, incorporate some kind of signature sound into it. Is that something that you do as well, working across multiple genres and with many different artists?
I do, yes, and a lot of it is genre specific.
Okay.
If I do a lot of reggae music and hip hop, R&B, and electronic dance music, so yes, I do have my little signature things. They're mostly with delays,
Nice.
reverbs, and filtering and EQs, morphing stuff. I do have my signature things that people hire me for, that I love to, that I've gotten really good at, and I still, you know, try to expand upon and get it, you know, get better, get better at and improve upon. Um, and it's again, it all comes back to it being applicable to the song, being applicable to the project, to the artist, to the vision that the artist has, and uh, and incorporating. So yeah, to answer your question, definitely, you know, and I keep trying to improve on that as well, you know. So I'm not doing the same type, exact same effects and delays and reverbs and filtering that I've done on all these other
Mhm.
records. You know, switch it up a little bit to
Sure.
fit this particular project, wherever it may be.
Absolutely. Keeping it fresh, but knowing, you know, what works, so to speak. And one thing I want to ask you on that too is how important is that? And like to give a little broader example first, like our company is all about, you know, music mentoring and guidance. So, you know, when one of our clients has a question, like we're kind of, at least we strive to be, you know, their go-to spot. Looking at like the production side of things, if somebody's wanting this unique element and they know Bonsai can do that better than anybody else, from like a point of view of, let's say, an aspiring producer who's trying to build a name for themselves and trying to build their, you know, their client base, is that important to have some signature sound that people know you for, that you can, you know, maybe do better than anybody else, or something you do different than everybody else, so that you can leverage that in hopes of making a name for yourself in this business?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, all throughout my career, I remember we always used to say back in the day is like you're only as good as your last record. So
Right.
so you're every release that you do, every project that you put your name on, you know, mixed by, produced by, recorded by, um, you know, that is your legacy, that is your reputation, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, it's very important to you know, making a name for yourself, right? And this is my style of mixing, right? My style of producing or writing, whatever it may be. um you know, what do I bring to the table? What do I add collectively, creatively to the team? To, you know, unless you're a one-man band and you do everything yourself, that's very important. Yeah, just establishing that sound, you know.
Mhm. Do you have a question, Mark?
Yeah, I have a question. When mixing different styles of music, do you take into account different aspects of what you might have to do differently? Let's say if you're doing a pop record and then a reggae record to a rap record, the type of effects and the type and the amount of time it might take to mix it.
Absolutely, yes. Oh, of course, especially when it comes to ambience and like how dry and how wet things should be, and which elements should are dry and which elements are have more ambient. That's a big factor in to answer your question for sure.
Great, thanks. And also of the way music is listened to now. Years ago, we used to have quality audiophile equipment, speakers and turntables. Now we're down to cell phones.
And
So
this,
you take into consideration when you're mixing for, let's say, hip hop, that it's gonna be played on a 2-inch speaker rather than a hi-fi system.
Yes. Yeah, that's always the challenge. It's an ongoing challenge these days, especially in the last decade, with the advent of everyone listening to music. First of all, MP3 format, which is we work in high res format, which is the huge files. For instance, a song that I'm working on would be over 100 meg of digital audio that gets compressed down to 3.6 meg or whatever,
Right.
5 meg MP3. So there's a lot of loss that's in reduction to have it. So but that enables you to have 20,000 songs on your phone as opposed to 20 songs on your phone.
And lower quality
Yeah,
and
but
high compression.
and in terms of mixing and wise, really taking into consideration low frequencies, because low frequency reproduction takes a bigger cone, a bigger speaker to push that air, right?
That's right.
So low, 40 hertz, 50 hertz, 60 hertz, and it doesn't really come across on these little earbuds and these little phones. So we find ways to use upper harmonics, higher harmonics, for instance, or using I'll layer stuff with a higher octaves and stuff. So those notes can come through on a little tiny device where
Yeah.
you know normally you would hear it perfectly clear with a big format speaker, and it's fine, but they don't really translate on such a small device, right?
We had the first dithering down of the rates, I believe, when we went to CD from high quality vinyl, what was 196 down to what, 44 something? I mean,
44.1.
we lost bottom on those records right there.
Yeah, but
I-
still, in comparison to what a lot of these people, formats today, CD quality is pretty decent.
Yeah, I agree with that. Okay.
yeah. I want to switch gears here a bit. Mark, I got a question for you actually. I know when
Oh,
every time we talk, I feel like you're bringing up something new, you're working on something new. You have this amazing drive within you and I love it. And I know that for some artists they put out a song and then they burn out sometimes. Not Mark. Mark's got this fire within him. I want to know, like, finding inspiration is vital for any creative professional. How are you finding that spark and continuing to like nurture it over many years?
oh, I'm always working on something, and every day somebody comes to me with a major problem. Like today, I won't mention who, but there was a contract issue. An attorney went through a contract, and instead of marking it up, rewrote it and had an hour narration with the client about what it was, and changed the venue of legal jurisdiction to the state where the artist lived for convenience, which is a no-no for a label to allow that. So that was today. So every day I have a challenge. There was an issue the other day with getting a producer to sign over the rights to release a record to the artist. They didn't have a pre-agreement for production. That went for 2 weeks back and forth, got it done. I just asked the producer to do it because it's a benefit for him to get him in front of a major label to get more productions. We got that done. So every day is a different thing. And I have my own projects I have to worry about also, which, as I mentioned to you, the copyright reform issue, which I'm getting more momentum on. And when I have sufficient exposure for that, I will contact you. Maybe you want to do a podcast to cover how far I've gotten with it.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Let me know and we'll get it
Thanks.
up. And for you listening in, you can look forward to that.
Thank
Bon
you.
yeah, absolutely. Bonsai, kind of same question for you. I mean, you've achieved so much in your career. You worked with so many artists across all genres. What is continuing to drive you to do more and more?
Yeah, I have to say, it's just the music itself, just music in general every day. It's just, I'm inspired by, receiving songs and receiving ideas and, concepts to jump on and collaborate on and work on. That to me keeps me going every day. Um, it's funny because I was about to post something today that I just want to give thanks to the universe every day for when I wake up in the morning for that different song that's stuck in my head. Every
Yeah.
day I wake up to a song. It could be an old classic song from the 60s, 70s, 80s, or it could be something new I've been working on for the last few weeks. But I always wake up with this repeat. It's stuck on repeat in my head, and I give thanks for that. I'm thankful for that every day, because it really inspires me. It's the music itself that keeps me going. It keeps me youthful.
Absolutely. What's the song stuck in your head right now?
Oh my God, this morning it was a song by Samurai in Jamaica that I had been working on called History of Violence. It's a beautiful, beautiful song. It's Samurai and Mortimer on um, what's the name of the Overstand Records out of Jamaica, and it's a
Okay.
beautiful, beautiful song. It's a beautiful album. I got to work on it. And it has a great mix of R&B, hip hop, and reggae together. It's beautiful. That was
Amazing.
today's song. Every day is a different one. Yesterday was some like stupid pop song from the 1970s.
I've had one stuck in my head for about 6 months now. It's a banger. It's "Hey Jude" by the Beatles, but it's in there, and I'll be just cooking dinner, and "Hey Jude" just start singing it. You know what I mean? I'm not going to sing on here though, because I was not blessed with vocal cords. Mark, you got a song stuck in your head right now?
Not yet,
No.
but I do have a question for Bonzai. I know you've worked with a lot of major artists, and we haven't covered that. I was curious, there any particular instances that you recall that were interesting that you'd want to talk about, or any
Um,
favorite people or favorite records you recorded?
yeah, recently, the Tribal Seeds album that was just released on February 9th. It's called Ancient Blood. That whole album, there's 17 songs on the album. I was blessed to work on 15 of the 17 songs. That's a great record. The Mortimer album, that's going to be coming out later this year. I've worked on 11 or 12 tracks on that album over the last year or so, which is wonderful. The Samurai album I was just talking about. Oh gosh, yeah, I've been very blessed with some really amazing projects recently.
Great. And also, when people might want to find your work or information about you or the project, where would they go?
My website, bonzaicaruso.com, or my profiles on Instagram at Bonzai Caruso, Facebook, James Bonzai Caruso, or Bonzai Caruso. I have two of them. There's a LinkedIn profile as well. But yeah, usually that or through my email, just bonzaicaruso@gmail. That's how most people connect with me.
Thank you.
I actually want to touch on that too. I can't imagine how many artists and projects and sessions you've been a part of, so I'm not going to get you to talk on any one in particular, as I'm sure those are probably just all blurred together. When looking at them all, though, are there any like takeaways, whether good or bad, from people that you've worked with that have stuck in your mind? And I ask this question because, there are aspirants out there that are, would dream of, working with yourself on a project and having you, produce for them. And reading the room and being professional is so important. And sometimes you just don't know what you don't know, and you overstep or you ask for too much. So I just like to get you to talk on that. Like, what are kind of three maybe things to avoid doing in sessions or asking your producer, and three things that are, great to do? And it doesn't have to be three, but just many as you'd like.
I mean, from an artist perspective or from a producer's perspective?
From a producer's perspective. So when you're working with these clients, like, yeah.
Yeah, just listening, just be a good listener, and be a good collaborator, and offer your suggestions, and just be truthful, honest with yourself and with them without overstepping, over talking, over. Being a good listener is the most important thing.
Mhm.
Listen to what your artist that you're working with is trying to express, and put your 2 cents in when necessary, of course, and really pause to think about what you're going to say when you're about to make a suggestion, or not, just boom, right off the top of your head. But let's do this, let's do that, without just trying to really freight train the project in terms of like, you know with ego. Ego is a killer
Mhm.
ego has its place. Ego is, we used to say for many years, you check your ego at the door, you pick it up on your way out. But it does have its place, especially for the artist. The artist is the one that their ego, it comes into play. It's necessary. That's what you're dealing with. They are the star. They are it's about the artist. It's about the song. It's about the artist. As a producer, of course, ego is helpful and it's good, but you have to know how to regulate it, place it, bring it up when it's necessary, utilize it as a tool, so to speak, but control it, because ego can destroy a session,
Sure.
can destroy that collaborative energy, right,
Mhm.
that give and take, that back and forth, which is very critical and crucial to the process.
Mhm. No, absolutely. I appreciate you sharing that because, yeah, I know sometimes it's not that people want to be rude or want to overstep, but I think there's kind of an unwritten rule as to how that relationship looks a lot of the times, and especially if it is, a renowned producer like yourself and somebody that's maybe new to music that are want to absorb as much as they can at the same time want to get their ideas across too. So I appreciate you sharing that. I skipped over a question I wanted to ask earlier. You mentioned the hybrid approach a few times throughout this. Um, I'd love for you to touch on that a little more of like what is the hybrid approach, and then can you share an artist you worked with or a project in which you used a hybrid approach, combining elements from maybe different genres, and how that resulted in a successful outcome?
Oh yeah, I mean, what I was referring to in terms of hybrid was particularly that comment I made was in regards to mixing. So when I get
Okay.
uh talk about mixing everything in the box, right? And trying to route using the digital audio platform outputs from Pro Tools or your digital workstation, but on a desk, on an analog desk, to incorporate analog reverbs, analog return delays, for instance, echo chambers, things like that's where the hybrid comes in. So you're not 100% in the box, although most of your source is coming from the box. Your final product is going through all this analog processing before it gets back to the digital domain again. So that's what I was referring to in terms of
I see.
hybrid. um, but one challenging thing that I find while remaining in the box without using it, let's say you don't have an analog desk to work with, but you have a few pieces of analog gear that you can run through, maybe a compressor EQ or a standalone rack reverb, for instance, routing an output of your DAW through these units and back into your desk, back into your box, your DAW, whether it's Pro Tools, Logic, whatever. In doing so, depending upon the chain of events that you're running through, let's say you're going to EQ a kick or a snare or something, there's going to be some latency. So from the output of your DAW through the analog gear back into your DAW, if you're going to staying in the box, you're going to have, now you've just delayed that signal by 192 samples or whatever on the way out, and another 192 samples through your converter on the way in. So now you've just shifted that audio back a little bit. So you need to compensate for that to make it phase accurate. You want to keep all your audio phase accurate so that you don't lose your phase accuracy, especially with low frequencies, because that'll really mess up your sound. You can lose your low end if you're not paying attention to the phase accuracy of things. So it's a little challenging depending upon how you go about it, whether or not you do have a large platform analog desk or you're staying in the box most of the time, so there are different ways of application for that.
Sure. I can imagine. Wow, I wish I was a little more knowledgeable in this side of things to ask some follow-ups on, because I'm listening here and I'm like, this is such great knowledge. This is not my area of expertise. So I really wish I could dive more into that. Mark, do you have any kind of follow-ups on there?
Yeah, how much time do you have? Talk about this for hours and hours and hours. Yeah, it's just, there's a lot of, I mean, there's so many factors that come into play when to get good sounding records made, and it's starting from the source of your sound, whether it's the microphones you use, the audio chain, the signal chain, the microphones, the big thing, microphones, microphone placement, preamps, you know, gain stage, gain gain stage structure, gain structure throughout from the time it hits the microphone to the mic pre to your digit to your DAW or analog if you're using analog, just to maintain a healthy signal chain throughout is crucially important.
Right on. Pearls of wisdom there for you listening in. I know that you have got like what you do bonsai down to like a it's a fine art now. You know exactly what you're doing in all aspects of it, whether that's the technology or everything else. I know you're still experimenting though, and you're trying to you're keeping it fresh, so to speak, like what you mentioned earlier. You're trying to adapt to artist sound, to different genres and stuff like that. And I think experimentation with whatever you're doing is important, because if you do the same thing over and over again, you're going to be in a box and it's going to get stale. So I love the approach that you're taking. Are there any like specific examples you can give when you just like experimented with something new and it just led to this unexpected but totally exciting and amazing result?
Oh, there's so many of them. I don't know where to start. You know, just, again, it's being musical. The biggest thing I can offer to people who are aspiring to do what I'm doing is it's really important, vitally important, I think, to know music in terms of being a musician, whether you just know chords on a piano or a few chords on, but having knowledge of music
Mm,
theory, the basics of all that is vitally important when it comes to being a mixer and a producer and an engineer like myself. Having those skills is vital. It really is, because then it's insight, right, on how these things, arrangement wise, you're arranging strings and horns and piano and bass and guitar together so that they work together and complement each other as opposed to fighting each other. Um,
sure.
yeah, but and then experimenting with stuff. And you know, I mean, you asked me for examples. There's so many. I mean, I don't know where to start. I can name a gazillion records that, I just experiment with delays and making sure delay timings are musical timings, compression timings are musical timings, reverb timings are musical, or, there are decay times, attack times, release time, ADSR, attack, decay, sustain, release. Your envelopes, all that are timed, um, and sometimes not timed. It could be wacky and it works. So that's where the experimental comes
Sure.
in. Starting from a base that's musical, it works musically and rhythmically and in time is very, very important. So those factors are really what are very important that I try to I always keep in mind with every song, every record.
Absolutely. One thing I just want to mention too is like for you listening in or watching in, don't feel like you have to know how to do everything on your own. Like there's not, every successful musician has a team behind them. And like I'm bringing this up because I see a lot of people that I mentioned this at the very beginning of the podcast that call themselves a producer because they try using some fancy tools, but there's so much more to it. And if you're not the best engineer or the producer, there are people like Bonzai that can help. And just as a side note here, I want to quickly emphasize the importance of building a team around you. I know when you're starting out, maybe you don't have the budget, but if you do and you can invest in people that specialize in one area, that's going to be your best bet. If you're a fantastic vocalist, amazing. And then if you're not the best, engineer, bring somebody on. If you're not the best vocalist, but you're a fantastic songwriter, try and find a vocalist. And I'm putting that out there, just because I think like it's so important to build a team around you. And I'm just listening to you, Bonsai, and I'm like, I see this spark in your eye. I see how passionate you are and how much energy you have. And I'm like, dang, like this would be a fantastic person to have a part of your team. And sometimes I see artists and songwriters and producers trying to do everything themselves, when building a team around them is actually going to be so much better because they can utilize, the talents that you have, and then they can focus on their own talent. So just a little bit of a side note there. I know that was a little bit of a tangent.
Oh, but that's really important. That's very, very important. Like for, yeah, even as a songwriter myself and a collaborator, when I collaborate, I might have an idea on the piano. I play many, many instruments. I play none of them well.
Right.
Okay. I know.
I
I'm
don't know if
well
I
enough.
believe that. I think you'll
Well,
play.
well enough to come up with a few ideas here and there, whether it's a keyboard or guitar, or I'm mostly a percussionist and guitar player and
Right.
keyboards and stuff. But when I'm come up with an idea for a part, right away I know who's going to play it. I know a guy I'm going to call that's going to
Mm,
redo all this. He's going to redo my guitar. He's going to redo my piano, even redo my drums. I don't care because they're going to do it better than me. But there's the basic concept. Here's the idea. Let someone else run with it, and
mhm,
collaborate, bring people in. And it's not always about money. Yeah, if you can come up with a few bucks to collaborate, or whether it's a collaboration where they participate in ownership of the song. They have a percentage of writers
right.
if they're collaborating on that level. And really, changing the little simple little chords I came up with, and they manipulate. There's a percentage of the song right there. So it's about sharing too. When,
Mhm,
taking into consideration, yes, okay, I don't have a big budget, but you find people that believe in your vision, in your sound, your goal, and bring them on board, and don't try to hoard everything yourself.
mhm.
Share with other people.
And be honest with yourself and leave your
Yeah,
ego at the door of what
e-
you can do well, and maybe what, others could do better.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. There's room for everybody.
absolutely. Mark, do you have any other questions you'd like to ask Bonsai here?
Yeah, I have one more. Basically, when mixing and mastering, are you considering the format that it might go into that used to be vinyl, but now we have the digitized version? Are you still considering mixing differently for vinyl as you would for digital?
Yeah, not so much on the mixing side, a little bit, but not really so much on the mixing side. When it comes down to the mastering, yes, because there is a different mastering for vinyl.
Mhm.
Um, it has to do with the volume of low frequencies. You can't really cut vinyl as loud on certain complex low frequency waveforms, because the needle will actually jump out of the groove if it's too
Right.
right. So there is a slight difference with mastering process for vinyl. Um, and not so much. I mean, if overall in terms of clipping, we're all trying to push volume as loud as possible, but it can even on all. This goes across all formats. You just reach a point of not good saturation in the digital realm. Saturation is not always, and distortion is not always pleasant like it is in the analog realm. Whereas in the
Right.
analog realm, that tape compression and distortion is nice, not so much in the digital realm. But yeah, and then there's now there with Dolby Atmos. I know they have their format with Dolby Atmos immersive audio, where they have a specification in terms of their loudness gain rates to be certified. So that comes into play, but that's mixing in Dolby Atmos, which I'm just
What about
starting.
the frequency range difference between a vinyl record and, let's say, a MP3 when
Um,
finished?
Same thing. I don't really do I don't consider that while I'm mixing in terms of frequencies, only mastering, like I said, for how complex the low frequency, what's going on there, and the lows for vinyl.
Like, okay, great, thanks.
Awesome. Well, Bonsai Mark, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting. Just before I conclude this podcast, Bonsai, is there anything else you were hoping I was going to ask and didn't, and that you'd like to share?
Oh, geez. No, I think we covered a lot there. I mean, I could go on, I could do this for hours and hours, but no, I think we covered a lot. And I really appreciate you having me here. This has been really, really wonderful.
It's my pleasure. Mark, how about yourself? Anything you're hoping I was going to ask you and didn't?
Not today, but maybe next time.
Not today.
Yeah, we could do another one would be specific about a certain album or a certain
Yeah.
artist or certain project, which we
Yeah.
could fill another hour with easily.
Absolutely. I'm game for that. So let's do that. In the meantime, though, that is going to conclude this episode. I'll have links below for you to get in touch with Bonzai and Mark. In the meantime, though, that is going to conclude this episode. Until next time, I've been Mac, that's been Bonzai and Mark, and you've been amazing. Take care and keep making music.
Thanks, you guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Mac.